Well, I think there's a lot of things going on in the world. We have an election coming up in November. You have two candidates that are generally viewed as, one is bad, the other one is worse. We don't want to see these guys run, but I'm hoping that they drop out, and that's a hope rather than a forecast. I would say that the debt situation. You're right. I'm concerned. I think we have a system of leadership in this country that has evolved to a leadership at crisis. On your program a number of months ago, you had Mitt Romney and a fellow from Virginia, Manchin, and they basically endorsed Simpson Bowles, which was I think about 8 or 9 years ago. The only problem is nothing was done about Simpson Bowles' report, and the problem is 3 times larger today. But you have no idea when the stuff hits the fan. I remember very fondly how Pete Peterson and Joe Fowler, former Secretary of the Treasury, who was a Goldman Sachs partner, a very real gentleman, ran full-page ads in the Wall Street Journal alerting the public to the evils of the budget and trade deficit. It was 1972. So here we are 50 years later, and the only significance of the deficit is we have the lowest interest rates in the history of the world. So nobody knows when the stuff hits the fan, but ultimately, if deficits don't matter, as some people insist, then I'll be too conservative. But if deficits matter, and I think they will ultimately, I think we're heading to a financial crisis in this country. But we have a deficit that is very large at a time when the economy is reasonably fully employed.
You give the Fed what kind of grades, Lee? And I know you're.
I give the Fed a low grade. I think what I would say is they held interest rates at near zero for 10 years, and at the time, Powell said to the public, the stock market is not expensive given where interest rates are. They never bought telling people interest rates didn't belong to zero. Then, very abruptly, in a matter of 12 months, he raised interest rates 500 basis points. They stabilized the system. Now they're talking about cutting rates and that the Fed is too restrictive. There's no signs that I could tell of in the economy or in the market that the Fed is restrictive. The stock market is near a high. You're seeing lots of speculation in the market. There's stuff with, I'm not involved, but there's stuff with Trump, the SPAC is an example of the speculation in the market. So I see no signs between the economy and performance and the market's performance that the Fed is too restrictive. I expect we'll get 1 or 2 cuts in rates in the short end, but the long end I think is overvalued, which is a real problem because all the valuation models that one looks at as the stock market expensive relative to bonds, I think bonds are overvalued. Prior to 2008, in the great financial crisis, the 10-year bond yielded in line with nominal GDP. So if you take inflation at 3 to 4%, not 2, and add to that real growth of 2%, you have nominal GDP growing 5 or 6%. And I don't think the 10-year bond would be interesting at 5 or 6%. To me, at least, I'm an equity-oriented guy. I find lots of things to do in the market that make more sense than bonds.
Although you have some bonds, let's talk about some of your holdings. Like you're not in cash, obviously. Do you have a higher cash component right now, given your market outlook?
I'm pretty heavily I have 15% of my family office assets are in energy, about 20%, and it's something I've been very wrong on timing-wise, but I think, it falls into the category. If something sounds too good to be true, the odds are it's not true, is legato first lien bonds. They're trading around 15 cents on the dollar. It's a complex story, but at the end of the day, I've spoken to 7 major law firms, all say the same thing. The government's behavior here has been disgraceful. 7 years ago, the Department of Defense falsely, and I say falsely, alleged that there was spectrum interference. The only body responsible for setting spectrum policy in the country is the FCC. They studied the allegations for 5 years. After 5 years, a bipartisan group voted 5-0 to approve the use of the spectrum. Then all of a sudden, the Department of Defense changed their story. They say, we want the spectrum for national security purposes, and we're not going to tell you why. Okay, I have no problem with that. I'm a loyal American. You just got to pay for what you want. And, and finally, the company, belatedly, in my view, sued the government. They're suing the government for $40 billion. And in their lawsuit, they say they have evidence that the government lied under oath. Not a nice thing. The government basically is using their spectrum without compensation. And the government has made a sale of the company very difficult because of the Turner Amendment, which says that if you own legal spectrum, you can't do business with the Department of Defense. That stuff should be overturned in the lawsuit, at which point I think the bonds go from 15 to par, plus you're getting 17 half points of PIK interest every year. Now, it's a 144A piece of paper, so it may be too complicated for your audience. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a big
But to me, it's a giveaway.